A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
You know, Herman, it is rare that we get to talk about a structural shift in the major world religion that is happening in real time, right in front of our eyes. Usually, these things take centuries to solidify. But what we are seeing in the modern Orthodox world right now is different. It is a fundamental move from women being the passive recipients of religious law to becoming its authorized consultants and architects. Today's prompt from Daniel in Jerusalem is about the role of the Yoetzet Halacha, and specifically how pioneering figures like Nechama Barash are moving the needle on religious authority. It is a topic that sits right at the intersection of ancient ritual, modern medicine, and a very specific kind of communal leadership that has emerged out of the recent trauma in Israel. We are calling it the shift from recipient to consultant.
It is a massive topic, Korn, and honestly, it is one of the most successful examples of institutional evolution I have ever seen. I am Herman Poppleberry, and I have actually been looking forward to this because the Yoetzet Halacha movement is perhaps the most significant professionalization of female religious authority in the last 30 years. When Daniel sent this over, I started digging into the numbers to see where we stand as of today, March 23, 2026. There are now approximately 220 certified Yoetzet Halacha working globally. That might sound like a small number in the grand scheme of the Jewish world, but their impact on the ground, especially in Jerusalem and North America, is out of all proportion to their headcount. They are effectively the frontline responders for the most intimate aspects of Jewish life.
Well, let us start with the basics for a second, because I want to make sure we are clear on the distinction here for our listeners who might not be familiar with the hierarchy. The term is Yoetzet Halacha, which translates roughly to advisor in Jewish law. But the distinction is that they are not rabbis, right? At least not in the formal, traditional sense of the word. They occupy this very specific niche that did not really exist in a professionalized way until Rabbinate Chana Henkin founded the program at Nishmat back in 1997. Why was that distinction so important at the start?
That distinction is the entire ballgame, Korn. A Yoetzet Halacha is a female advisor who has undergone 2 years of intensive, high-level study, specifically focusing on Taharat HaMishpacha. That is the Hebrew term for family purity laws. These are the intricate, often very private rules surrounding menstruation, ritual immersion in the mikveh, and physical intimacy between husband and wife. Traditionally, if a woman had a question about these laws, which can get incredibly technical when you factor in medical issues, she had to go to a male rabbi. The Yoetzet model changed that by creating a category of female experts who have the same technical mastery of the text as a rabbi, but can engage with women on a peer-to-peer level. It was designed to be institutionally acceptable to the Orthodox establishment while solving a massive practical problem of accessibility and modesty.
I imagine that peer-to-peer element is a huge part of the draw. I mean, if you are a woman dealing with a complex medical issue, like endometriosis or postpartum complications, and you need to know how that interacts with your religious obligations, explaining those intimate details to a male rabbi can be, at best, awkward, and at worst, a total barrier to practicing the law correctly. You might just stop asking questions because it is too uncomfortable. But what I find interesting is that this is not just about making things more comfortable or softer. It is about a different kind of expertise entirely.
You hit on the exact point that the critics often miss. This is not a rabbi-light position. The curriculum at Nishmat's Karen Ariel Institute is grueling. We are talking about thousands of pages of Gemara, Rishonim, and contemporary responsa. These women are studying the same primary sources as men studying for rabbinic ordination, but they are also receiving specialized training in gynecology, fertility, and women's health from top-tier medical professionals. So, when a woman calls a Yoetzet, she is not just getting a religious ruling, she is getting a consultation that bridges the gap between the doctor's office and the synagogue. It is a dual literacy that very few traditional rabbis possess. They can look at a medical report and a page of Talmud and see how they inform one another.
And that brings us to Nechama Barash. Her name comes up constantly in this space, and she seems to be taking the role of the Yoetzet into much more provocative, or perhaps I should say, comprehensive territory. I was reading about her book, Uncovered, Women's Roles, Mitzvot, and Sexuality in Jewish Law, which has become a foundational text since it came out. She is not just answering questions about ritual baths. She is tackling things like sex positivity and how Jewish law handles modern ideas of intimacy. How does she manage to stay within the boundaries of orthodoxy while pushing the envelope that far?
Nechama Barash is a fascinating figure because she leans into the tension rather than trying to smooth it over. She is a Yoetzet Halacha and a sex educator, which is a combination that would have been unthinkable in the Orthodox world 40 years ago. In her book and her teaching, she argues that the halachic system, the system of Jewish law, is robust enough to handle modern conversations about pleasure, consent, and even LGBTQ+ inclusion, provided you have the scholarship to back it up. She just finished a major winter series for Torah in Motion on the 19th of March called The Halakhic Journey of Jewish Women. She spent weeks tracing how female authority has evolved from the biblical era to the present day. Her argument is basically that women have always been the primary practitioners of these laws, so it only makes sense that they should be the primary authorities on them. She is moving the conversation from what is allowed to how do we flourish within this system.
It sounds like she is redefining what authority looks like, because, as you mentioned, they do not issue novel Paiskei Halacha or original legal rulings. They are not supposed to be creating new law. But if you are the one navigating the application of the law for thousands of women, are you not effectively shaping the law through your interpretation? If I am a Yoetzet and I tell a woman how to apply a rule to her specific medical situation, that is a functional authority, regardless of the title.
That is the core of the controversy, and it is why the slippery slope argument is so persistent. If you talk to the leadership at Nishmat, they are very careful to say that Yotzot are consultants, not decisors. If a question is truly unprecedented or requires a major legal shift, they are supposed to refer it to a senior rabbi. But in practice, most of the questions women have are about the application of existing law to specific, complex life situations. When a Yoetzet helps a woman navigate those details, she is exercising a functional authority that is very hard to distinguish from a rabbinic one. This is why some of the more conservative factions in the Orthodox world view the Yoetzet program as a threat, while more liberal groups see it as a necessary evolution to keep the law relevant. It is the difference between having the title and having the influence.
The slippery slope argument is interesting because it suggests that the title is the only thing standing between the status quo and a total overhaul of the hierarchy. But it feels like the title of Yoetzet actually protects the movement in a way. It allows them to do the work without the political baggage of the word rabbi. I mean, we have talked before about the Maharat movement, which does ordain women as rabbis, and they have faced much fiercer pushback than the Yoetzet program ever has. By staying in this consultant lane, they have actually been able to penetrate much deeper into the mainstream, haven't they?
It was a brilliant strategic move by Rabbinate Chana Henkin. By focusing on a specific domain, the laws of family purity, they carved out a space where their expertise was indisputable. But what we are seeing now, especially in early 2026, is that the domain is expanding. It is no longer just about ritual law. It is about communal leadership during times of crisis. This is where the Gaza Shift comes in. We are sitting here in late March, and the regional conflict has fundamentally changed the social fabric of Israel. The traditional structures of authority were tested, and in many cases, it was the women who stepped into the vacuum.
I want to dig into that Gaza shift because it feels like a catalyst for everything we are talking about. On March 11th, there was that major international webinar about women's leadership through the war and beyond. And then back on February 24th, Nishmat held that Purim Yom Iyun, focusing on reforming the nation's body and soul. It seems like the role of the Yoetzet is becoming much more public and much more political, in the sense of building national resilience. How did the war change the way these women are viewed by the community?
The Gaza Shift is a real phenomenon that scholars were just discussing at a gathering in Manhattan on the 15th of March. When you have a society under the kind of prolonged stress that Israel has faced, you need leaders who are integrated into the daily lives and physical realities of the people. During the height of the conflict, you had thousands of women whose husbands were on the front lines. These women were dealing with pregnancy, loss, and extreme anxiety, all while trying to maintain their religious lives. The Yoetzot became the frontline responders. They were the ones on the phones at 3 in the morning, not just answering technical questions about the mikvah, but providing spiritual and emotional triage. The March 11th webinar really highlighted this. The argument being made now is that integrating female leadership isn't just a matter of equity anymore, it is a strategic necessity for communal stability.
It is almost as if the war accelerated a process that was already underway. When things are normal, you can afford to debate the semantics of authority. But in a crisis, you just need someone who knows the law and knows the medicine and can talk you through a panic attack. I suspect that once a community gets used to looking to a Yoetzet for that kind of holistic leadership, they are not going to want to go back to a model where she is just a phone consultant for ritual questions. They have seen her as a communal anchor.
I think that is a very astute observation. We are entering what some are calling the Judaism after Gaza era. It is a period where the traditional silos are breaking down. You see this in organizations like the Eden Center, where Nechama Barash and others are working. They are taking the mikveh experience, which is the most private, ritualistic part of Jewish life, and turning it into a hub for health education and intimacy counseling. They are saying that the ritual cannot be separated from the person's physical and emotional well-being. That is a very modern, almost holistic approach to religion, but they are rooting it in very ancient texts. It is not about changing the law, it is about changing the environment in which the law is practiced.
I want to go back to the technical side for a second, because I think our listeners would appreciate the sheer depth of the training. You mentioned it is 2 years. Is there a testing process? How do you actually certify that someone is a Yoetzet Halacha? Is it just a certificate of attendance, or is it more like a bar exam?
Oh, it is much more like a bar exam. It is incredibly rigorous. After the 2 years of study, the candidates have to pass a series of 4 comprehensive exams. These exams are administered by a panel of 4 rabbinic scholars. It is an oral and written defense of their knowledge. It is essentially the same level of examination that a man would undergo for his rabbinic license in this specific field, and they have to be recertified. It is not a one-and-done thing. There is a heavy emphasis on continuing education, especially because medical technology changes so fast. If a new fertility treatment or a new hormonal contraceptive comes out, the Yoetzot need to know how it works from a biological perspective before they can even begin to discuss the halachic implications. That professionalization is what gives them their bulletproof status in the community.
That professionalization seems like the key to their success. It makes it very hard for critics to dismiss them as just a group of activists. You can disagree with the role, but you cannot argue with the scholarship. It reminds me a bit of how we talked about the tension between democratic and theocratic governance in episode 1336. There is this constant push and pull in Israel between traditional authority and the needs of a modern, professionalized society. The Yoetzet Halacha feels like a bridge between those two worlds. They are the technocrats of the religious world.
It really is a bridge. And it is a bridge that is being built from the inside out. This is not a reform movement coming from the outside to change orthodoxy. This is a movement of women who are deeply committed to the system of halacha, who love the law and want to see it flourish. They are arguing that by empowering women as experts, you actually strengthen the system because you make it more accessible and more accurate. If a woman is too embarrassed to ask a male rabbi a question, she might just guess, or she might stop practicing that part of the law altogether. A Yoetzet prevents that. She keeps people within the system. In that sense, it is actually a very conservative move, in the literal sense of conserving the tradition.
So, by creating this role, they are actually increasing compliance with the law. That is a powerful argument to make to the rabbinic establishment. But let's talk about the more progressive side of this, like Nechama Barash's work on sexuality. Some people look at a book about sex positivity in an Orthodox context and think it is a radical departure. But Barash would argue that Judaism has always been a sex-positive religion, at least within the context of marriage. She is just using the modern vocabulary of consent and pleasure to re-articulate what she sees as foundational Jewish values. How is that being received in the more traditional corners?
It is a mixed bag, but the tide is turning. Barash is taking these topics out of the shadows and bringing them into the study hall. She is saying that if the Torah cares about the details of our physical lives, then it must care about the quality of our intimacy. Her work on LGBTQ+ inclusion is perhaps the most challenging for the establishment, but again, she approaches it through the lens of halachic scholarship. She is asking, how do we hold the person and the law at the same time? This is what she was exploring in her Torah in Motion series that just wrapped up on March 19th. She is tracing a journey where female authority isn't just about women's issues, but about the integrity of the entire community.
I can see why that would be groundbreaking. It is one thing to have a female advisor tell you whether or not you can go to the mikveh on a Tuesday. It is quite another to have her lead a seminar on how to maintain a healthy and pleasurable intimacy within the bounds of religious law. That feels like a much more significant claim to authority. It is the difference between being a technician of the law and being a guide for how to live a life. And as you mentioned, the Gaza Shift has made that guide role even more essential.
When the nation is traumatized, people are looking for guides who understand their specific pain. During the Purim Yom Iyun at Nishmat on February 24th, there was a lot of talk about Tikkun Olam repairing the world, but on a very personal, internal level. The Yoetzot are the ones doing that repair work, one consultation at a time. They are dealing with the body and soul of the nation, and we are seeing this influence spread. In many vibrant modern Orthodox communities now, the Yoetzet is a regular part of the leadership team, giving classes and counseling couples. This was a major point of discussion at that Manhattan gathering on the 15th of March. The role is moving from the periphery to the center.
I wonder what the second-order effects of this are going to be. If you have a generation of children growing up in the Orthodox world, seeing their mothers and their teachers calling a Yoetzet for guidance, how does that change their perception of religious authority? Does the male-only rabbinate start to look like an anomaly rather than the norm? Even if they don't call her rabbi, she is the one they see as the expert.
That is the million-dollar question. We are already seeing some shift in the Haredi world, which is much more conservative than the modern Orthodox world. There is a growing, though often quiet, interest in the Yoetzet model there because the practical benefits are so obvious. Even in communities that would never officially recognize a female rabbi, the idea of a female medical halachic consultant is starting to gain traction. We touched on some of these demographic pressures in episode 1257 when we discussed the future of the Haredi community. As these communities grow and interact more with the modern world, the need for specialized, professionalized leadership becomes unavoidable. You can't ignore the medical reality, and you can't ignore the fact that women are the ones navigating it.
It feels like the Yoetzet model provides a blueprint for how other faith traditions might handle similar tensions. You do not necessarily have to have a massive schism or a total abandonment of tradition. You can create these new specialized roles that solve practical problems while respecting the existing framework. It is a very pragmatic way of solving a problem. It is evolution through functional professionalization.
It really is. But I do not want to undersell how difficult this work is. Being a Yoetzet is not just about knowing the law, it is about carrying the weight of people's most intimate struggles. When Nechama Barash writes about uncovering these roles, she is doing it because she is sitting across from people who are hurting and who want to know if there is a place for them in the tradition they love. That is a heavy burden to carry, especially in the wake of a war. To be a pioneer like Barash or Rabbanet Henkin, you have to be willing to take fire from both sides. You have the liberals telling you that you are not going far enough because you are not demanding ordination, and you have the conservatives telling you that you are destroying the tradition.
To stand in that middle space and just do the work is incredibly impressive. So, as we look toward the future, toward this Judaism after Gaza era, what are the big takeaways for our listeners? If you are observing this from the outside, what should you be watching for?
The first takeaway is the importance of functional professionalization. If you want to change a deep-seated social structure, you do not always have to attack the front door. You can create a new category of expertise that becomes so indispensable that the structure has to adapt to include it. The Yoetzet Halacha did not replace the rabbi, she made the religious system work better, and in doing so she earned a seat at the table. That is a lesson that applies far beyond Judaism.
That is a great point. And the second takeaway for me is the necessity of dual literacy. In the 21st century, religious leadership cannot just be about ancient texts in a vacuum. It has to be able to speak the language of modern science, modern medicine, and modern psychology. The fact that these women are trained in both is what gives them their power. They are the only people in the room who can see the whole picture of a woman's life.
And the third takeaway is the role of crisis as a catalyst. The Gaza Shift shows that in times of national trauma, the old rules of who is allowed to lead often give way to the reality of who is capable of leading. The Yoetzet were ready when the crisis hit. Their performance over the last few years, and especially the leadership they showed in the events of February and March 2026, has effectively ended the debate over whether their role is necessary. It is no longer a luxury, it is a foundational part of the community's survival strategy.
It is a fascinating evolution, and I think Nechama Barash's work is going to be the textbook for this next generation. She is showing that you can be a rigorous scholar of the law and still be a compassionate, sex-positive modern human being. Those things do not have to be in conflict. In fact, they can reinforce each other. Her book, Uncovered, will likely be cited for decades as the moment when this conversation really broke into the mainstream.
I agree. And as we see more women entering this field, remember, we're at 220 and counting. I think we are going to see a lot more of that kind of bold text-based innovation. The slippery slope might not lead to the destruction of orthodoxy, but it is certainly leading to a much more vibrant and inclusive version of it. It is a version that isn't afraid of the body or the modern world.
It is a good reminder that traditions are not static. They're living things that have to breathe and adapt if they're going to survive. The Yoetzet Halacha movement is a perfect example of that breathing process in action. It is a very practical, very grounded form of religious change.
It really is. And it is something that Daniel is seeing firsthand in Jerusalem. It is not just a theoretical debate there, it is the reality of how his neighbors and friends are living their lives. They are turning to these women for answers that the old structures just weren't equipped to provide.
Well, I think we have covered a lot of ground today. This shift from recipient to consultant is one of those quiet revolutions that ends up changing everything. I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. Is the Yoetzet the ultimate compromise that saves the system, or is it the ultimate evolution that eventually transforms it into something entirely new? I suspect the answer is probably a bit of both, and that is exactly what makes it so interesting to watch.
That is the tension that makes it worth the deep dive.
Definitely. Well, thanks to everyone for tuning into this exploration of religious authority and the Gaza Shift. We want to give a big thanks to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping everything running smoothly behind the scenes.
And a huge thank you to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show. We literally could not do this without their support for the infrastructure that makes these deep dives possible.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you are finding these discussions valuable, we would love it if you could leave us a review on your podcast app. It really does help other people find the show and join the conversation.
You can also find our full archive and all the ways to subscribe at myweirdprompts.com. We have over 1,400 episodes there covering everything from battery chemistry to ancient philosophy.
We will be back soon with another prompt. Until then, stay curious.
Goodbye, everyone.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our